You are listening to an episode of Megan is Not a Parent But. And today's episode is brought to you by Positive Parenting Class Pass. Positive Parenting Class Pass is 6 simple positive parenting classes to kickstart your positive parenting journey. And you can start today at bekindcoaching.com/classpass. In today's episode, we will be chatting about what books have helped me understand trauma and its impacts. This is the bookend to our little mini series on trauma and its impacts and how it shows up. So I invite you to get cozy, grab your notebook, and let's dig in. Welcome to Megan is Not a Parent But, the podcast where I, your host, Megan Ford, former early childhood educator turned positive parenting coach, helps parents just like you learn how to deal with your strong-willed child's difficult behavior. I've been described from my clients as a blend between Brene Brown and Miss Frizzle, you know, the one from the Magic School Bus. I help bring awareness and hold space for the hard conversations and make big concepts like behavior and relationships and temperaments easy to understand and easy to implement. If you're a parent who struggles with your child's loud, dramatic, disruptive, over-the-top behavior, but don't think a parenting coach would help you because those are just for the bad parent or those parents, then this episode is especially for you. I invite you to grab a journal, cozy blanket, a warm beverage, and enjoy what you're about to explore. Just as we've shared this entire series, I invite you to remember that I am a parenting coach, and this information is for education and entertainment purposes. It is not a substitution for professional mental health support. All right, as we have talked through at the beginning of each of these past few episodes, the reason why it's so important to talk about this and understand this and really start to embrace it is that we are perfectly designed to survive. It is our brain's main focus. It's its job and its role. When our brain is perceiving threats, it activates a defense response. That defense response kicks in so that we stay alive. It is very primal. My work in helping parents remove fear-based punishments is so that we can start to lower the defense responses. We can start to advocate for connection and empathy and compassion together. And that's because punishments inflict pain, and pain initiates a defense, and fear-based punishments elicit that defense. And those defenses are adaptive when in the presence of a real threat. And they can become maladaptive when we perceive the threat that is not really there. So before we get into the books that I have read and I encourage you to dig into, I want to share a story. And the story is actually one that happened probably just about a year ago. I had just enrolled in Clear and Kind members, and it was right in the middle still of quarantine. And I had a vet appointment. And at the time I was doing coaching calls twice a week on Mondays at 11 a.m. and Thursdays at 9 p.m. And so this was an appointment for Jude, my dog, to go to the vet. And it was scheduled for 9 a.m. on Monday. And so I had shared with the vet that I had an appointment at 11 a.m. So I was going to drop off the dog. I was going to drop off Jude. Let's call her by her name. I was going to drop off Jude, go home, have the call, and come back and pick her up after the appointment. And they were okay with it. And I was okay with it. And, because everybody was in this space of understanding, everything that was going on. So that morning I got ready, got Jude in the car, go to drop her off at 9 a.m., call, let them know that I'm here. And they don't call me back. And I'm just sitting in the parking lot. And I was like, okay, well, soon they'll call me back. I'm sitting in the parking lot for 10 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. And during this, I am becoming a pressure cooker. I don't understand what's happening. I thought everybody was on the same page. My lid was for sure flipped. And I made the decision that I needed to do the group coaching call from my car and log into Zoom on my phone, which was not the ideal situation. And sure enough, at 11 a.m., right as I'm starting the call, everybody's coming in. And as soon as that happens, the vet calls me. What had happened was that there was a miscommunication where I said I needed to drop Jude off early. They thought that I was going to drop off Jude at 11. So they were waiting until 11 to call me, where I was like, I'm trying to get out of here by 11. I have to leave the coaching call, go get Jude, bring her to the door. And I am upset. I'm upset. And I communicate this upset to the tech about how I was sitting in the parking lot for 2 hours, how the system is flawed. I was unloading. I was unloading it in a kind way, but I was being very firm and direct. And the first thing that the person did on the other side was bend down to meet me at eye level. She softened her approach. She softened her nonverbal cues. And she said, I hear that there is a miscommunication. I hear how frustrating this is. This is frustrating for all of us. And at that moment, I stopped and I paused and I was like, oh, thank you. I came back online. I said, thank you so much. I said, I see what you're doing. I value what you're doing and I appreciate what you're doing. This is hard. And thank you for taking such good care of my pet. Thank you for putting these systems in place. Thank you for validating me. In that moment, the person on the other side realized and was aware that I was upset, that I was dysregulated. They too were doing work to regulate themselves so that they didn't ignite my fire more. And I got back on the coaching call and I said, y'all will never guess what just happened. I'm going to share with you that I just was in presence of someone doing the work without having any personal relationship to me, and the impact it had for me and the trust building it left for me, knowing that I could leave my pet there. And that to me is like the story of why this work is so important. Getting emotional thinking about it. Why talking about these conversations are important. Why becoming trauma aware is being human aware. Why that's important is because we are all navigating this life and this journey together. And we all have different miscommunications that create a different stress response in all of us. And if we can be aware of that and understanding of that and look for those observable behaviors, then we can start to de-escalate situations rather than adding pressure to escalate it more. That's why I do this work, to help parents learn these signs in their children so that they can start to show up in ways that de-escalate situations rather than escalate them more. So, though this episode to me, I was sharing with my husband, Jason, this morning, that this episode kind of feels a little bit like a book report, which brings back a little bit of a trauma response from 4th grade, giving a book report on Anne of Green Gables. Even though all of that is present, I still think that this is such an important, valuable conversation to have because it impacts us. It's like just staring at us in plain sight. And so the more that we understand it, the more that we talk about it, the more that we hold it and care for it, the more powerful we are. I was going to say like as a human race, but more powerful we are all together. So all that to say, this episode, I'm sharing 5 books that helped me learn, understand, and begin to heal from my traumas. And I'm going to rate these using a little wave, right? Ride the wave. That's what we talk about. Riding the waves, riding the emotional waves. So I am going to rate these from having 1 wave, which is a good entry point and a book that is easy to digest, to 5 waves, which is more clinical and scientific. I found 5 books, rated them 1 wave to 5 waves, and I just want to kind of go through them. So these are the 5 books that we are going to be talking about. The first book, which I've rated 1 wave, is The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. I rated at 2 waves What Happened to You by Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry. Three Waves, It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolynn. Four Waves, When the Body Says No by Dr. Gabor Maté. And Five Waves, Healing Developmental Trauma, written by Dr. Heller and LaPierre. So I just wanted to introduce the book, introduce the author of the book, because I think it's very important to understand the background and the qualifications of the person writing the book, along with my 3 takeaways, my reasons for why I think that you should read it, and then some ways to learn more from that author. So the first book, The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. I love everything that this woman does. So Dr. Nadine Burke Harris is an award-winning physician, researcher, and advocate dedicated to changing the way our society responds to one of the most serious, expensive, and widespread public health crises of our time, childhood trauma. She was appointed as California's first ever Surgeon General by Governor Gavin Newsom in January of 2019, and she has just now stepped down from that role to focus on her family and her mental health herself, just reclaiming back into her and her communities. Dr. Burke Harris's career has been dedicated to serving vulnerable communities and combating root causes of health disparities. After completing her residency at Stanford, she founded a clinic in one of San Francisco's most underserved communities, Bayview, Hunters Point. It was there that Burke Harris observed that despite the implementation of the nation's best practices for immunizations, asthma, obesity treatment, and other preventative health measures, her patients still faced outside risks for poor health, development, and behavioral outcomes. This is her bio taken directly from the California government's website. And I just think that it's, again, just a snapshot of just her career. The Deepest Well, what I loved about this book is, one, it's easy to digest. It's a really easy to digest breakdown of the ACEs study. Along in this book, she shares personal stories and personal connections that just makes this work more palatable and understandable. I listened to this book on audiobook and she reads it. And I encourage you that if you enjoy digesting information that way, that it is worth the listen to, because the way that she can express herself, it's just something that I truly value. The third thing I loved about this book is that it left me with hope that healing is possible. A lot of this work, and a lot of times this work can feel really heavy and it can feel really overwhelming. And it can feel like, oh my gosh, taking in so much so fast, that her position in this work is really leaving with ways that you can empower yourself and others. She titled this book, The Deepest Well, after learning about the story of Jon Snow, which is, I always laugh because Jon Snow, I always associate with Game of Thrones, but the Jon Snow in this story is one of the first public health frontiers in the UK, and the cholera outbreak was ravishing these towns. And there's a lot of doctors who are writing scripts to treat the symptoms, right? They were having diarrhea, and they would treat the symptom of diarrhea with medicine. And it wasn't until Jon Snow started sourcing what is causing it. And he sourced it all the way back to one water well. They closed the water well down and the cholera stopped. And I think, dang, like, yes, like how often are we so quick to treat symptoms? I like to say that yelling is a symptom. Yelling is a symptom of something that's going on. The work that I do is to catch that well. Let's stop the well. Let's get down to the root source. What is that a symptom of? And let's treat that. So that's why she named her book The Deepest Well, because this is getting to the well. It is the deepest well. Let's cut it off. Let's heal it. Let's block it so that we stop treating the symptoms and instead start treating the root sources. So why do I think you should read it? I think that you should read it because adverse childhood experiences impact the majority of our society. I think that if you are around other people, understanding this is a requirement. And this work and the way that she goes about doing it is something that makes it easy to digest, understand, and implement. If you want to learn more from Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, I encourage you to also listen to her TED Talk, which is one of my favorite TED Talks, How Childhood Trauma Affects Across a Lifetime. I think that she presents this information so well in a way that can not only be received, but it also makes the desired impact. And I love it. I often share this TED Talk in my spaces, and then I always ask to those who didn't watch it, why did they not watch it? And the over resounding response I get is, I'm scared to watch it because I know I'm doing it. And I think that that is just so indicative to how rampant this is, that sometimes it is too much to even look at, because then we go into punishing ourselves. But in order to cut the well off, we must look at it. So if you're here listening to this now, if you're here reading these books, digging into this work, I commend you, because you're choosing to find the well and cut the well off. Brain break moment. All right. I know that I can go deep way fast. So let's just take a pause here to take a deep breath in and let it out. And listen while I let you know that this episode is brought to you by me, Megan, and my Positive Parenting Class Pass. Positive Parenting Class Pass are 6 simple positive parenting classes to kickstart your positive parenting journey. Those classes include Positive Parenting 101, which is a class that is just designed to give you the first steps in what positive parenting is and what it is not. Second class is Emotional Validation. In this class, we dig into how can we show up to have your child feel seen and heard in their lived experience. The third class is Setting Boundaries, all about communicating, enforcing, and allowing testing of your secure and consistent and firm boundaries. The fourth class is a class called Ending Entitlement. Inside of this class, we dig into how we are showing up using tools of entitlement and how we can start to release those tools and begin practicing tools of empowerment and choice. And we know that what we put down, they're going to pick up. The fifth class is a class all about natural consequences. This is a class that gets very clear, and you'll walk away knowing what an imposed consequence is, what a logical consequence is, and most importantly, how to begin utilizing natural consequences so your children begin learning from their lived experience. And the final class is a class all about apologizing. I like to say that connection is the most skipped over step and recovery is the least utilized step. So in that step, you'll start to learn how to show up and use impactful and effective apologies so that your child knows that you see them and hear them and care about them. If you are looking to begin your journey today, then I highly encourage you go to bekindcoaching.com/classpass and dig into the classes starting today. As my free gift, you will receive Raising Respectful Kids, which is my 3-part video series all about how to stop focusing on adding on more decorations to your child and to you and to your relationship, and instead starting to reinforce and build a solid and secure foundation together. I can't wait to hear all of your amazing wins from the steps that you take inside of Positive Parenting Class Pass. All right, ready to get back to our episode? Before we get back, let's take one more deep breath together. And take a deep breath in and let it out. And let's go. Moving on from that book, Two Waves is the book What Happened to You by Oprah and Bruce Perry. So Dr. Perry, we all know who Oprah is, so I did not add her into this bio because Oprah is just a great connector. She facilitates communities and conversations. She elicits responses. I'm actually drinking from my Oprah's 2020 Vision, Your Life in Focus. This is the last trip I went on before quarantine, the week before everything shut down. And I went to go see her live. And I just always admire the way that she facilitates these conversations. So Dr. Perry is the principal of the Neurosequential Network, senior fellow at the Child Trauma Academy, and a professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago, and the School of Allied Health, College and Science at La Trobe University. Over the last 30 years, Dr. Perry has been an active teacher, clinician, and researcher in children's mental health and the neurosciences, holding a variety of academic positions. His work on the impact of abuse, neglect, and trauma on the developing brain has impacted clinical practice, programs, and policies around the world. Dr. Perry is the author of The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, a best-selling book based on his work with maltreated children, and Born for Love, Why Empathy is Essential and Endangered. By Dr. Perry's most recent book, What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resiliency, and Healing. This book was co-authored with Oprah. What I loved about it, it is a conversation going back and forth where Oprah brings the stories and then Dr. Perry contextualizes it with the science, and they share their stories back and forth. So it's conversation in format. It's a very informal read. And again, it's easy to access and understand. We can start to see our own stories reflected back from their stories. And I love this book title as it challenges the common phrase, like, what's wrong with you? And I know growing up, I heard that often, like, what's wrong with you? Why are you acting like that? Right? Instead, embracing it, becoming aware of it and understanding, and then asking what happened to you? What's going on that we're acting that way? And it takes me back to the story of when I was dropping off Jude, where the person behind wasn't like, gosh, what's wrong with this woman? She could have even called me a Karen. Gosh, she's such a Karen, right? Like, she's just over the top. And instead of saying, what's wrong with you? That person who was on the other side bent down, met me with, what happened to you? You're clearly going through something that we are all going through. And I think that when we ask ourselves those questions, they start to shape how we show up. So switching that question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you invites a different lens and a different sense of compassion. So why do I think you should read it? This book helps pair the science with the application through Oprah sharing her experiences in connection to the research. It's just, again, a very conversational text going back. It's like you're sitting down to coffee with two friends. So if you want to learn more from Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah, I encourage you can listen to them do a deep dive of this book going back and forth. So you can kind of hear them in conversation with each other by listening to Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry in conversation at South by Southwest Education 2021. They have it's on YouTube. They have a whole conversation going back and forth. And you can also read Dr. Bruce Perry's book, The Boy Who Was Raised by a Dog, and listen to Oprah's podcast, Super Soul, which is kind of an offshoot of her Super Soul Sunday. Just ways to just continue surrounding ourselves with people who are pioneering and are laying the path and inviting these bigger conversations into play. I always feel like whenever I can get into the room with those people, it just feels better. We have a sense of commonality of our shared humanity that is just powerful. So 3 waves now, moving into the book, It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolynn. So director of the Family Constellation Institute in San Francisco, Mark is a world leader in the field of inherited family traumas. A best-selling author and sought-after lecturer, he teaches at hospitals, clinics, conferences, universities, and teaching centers around the world, including University of Pittsburgh, JFK University, Western Psychiatric Institute, the Omega Institute, and other spaces. This author takes all of this work and puts it into his book, It Didn't Start With You: How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How We End the Cycle. This, I think, is a very liberating book, as sometimes we think, I think we shared it actually during the Q&A from last episode, talking about the fawn response. I think it was Chelsea, didn't you say, I got it for free. Why do I have to pay to deal with it? Right? Like, this space of like, we inherit these toolboxes. This is a phrase that I use often. Like, we inherit these toolboxes. And sometimes there is a lot of shame tied around exploring these toolboxes, assessing these toolboxes, looking at these toolboxes, a lot of grieving too. Like, we wish that these toolboxes were different. And I think, just like we're going to talk about in next episode, talking about awareness is the first step of growth, giving ourselves the honor and privilege really of saying, hey, let me slow down and say, hey, I inherited this. There's nothing wrong with me, going back to last book title, right? This happened to me. This is my experience. This is the toolbox I have. And now I can find empowerment in saying, I want to grow and heal and change and evolve this toolbox. So that's something that I love about this book, is that this book starts at the beginning and asks for reflection. So we are here now because every single person in front of us, in some way, shape, or form, did their best to do better for. And I think that this is a little bit of a controversial take, especially in this field, is that if we looked back, and I'll take my own story, if I look back at my own mother, did she give me the toolbox that I want? No. No. If I could have curated a different toolbox of taking care of myself, I would source that differently. However, if I were to ask her about her toolbox, I know that she would say, I did better than what was done to me. And I think that is helped me soften into the compassion for my own mom, is that she too had this belief that she was doing better than before. And if I were to go back to my grandmother and ask her, she was able to afford different things for my mother than what was done for her. And I think that's the source of this book, is it's starting to unravel and just hold space for the journey that's gotten you to here. So being able to reflect back and say, hey, everything has gotten me to here, but now let me be in empowerment to move forward. It's pretty powerful. Something that I love about this book is that he mentions it a few times, that it is not dependent on knowing your direct history. So really meeting yourself where you're at, pulling from things that you may know, pulling in areas that you may know, but also knowing that this work isn't dependent on knowing. And it also helps with exercises and reflections and questions, helps break down and facilitate this breakdown of the generational cycles that we inherit. So just normalizing this process, like, let me bring it up, let me assess it, let me look at it, and let me grow from it. So why do I think you should read it? I think that this book really helps paint the whole picture. It's a really great book after we have understanding of childhood trauma. Once we have understanding and a foundation of what these concepts are, this allows us to help really dig deeper into that work. And it really allowed me to have empathy and compassion for my own journey so that I could start to release some of that anger. So ways to learn more from Mark is to go to his website. His website has a lot of different ways to connect to him and support him and read from him and take trainings from him, and just a lot of good ways. He's out there holding this space and facilitating these conversations. All right. The fourth book that I encourage you to take this work even deeper is When the Body Says No by Dr. Gabor Maté. So I rated this 4 waves. This is definitely a book that we get into after having a foundation of. It's a very technical book. It's a very nuanced read. It's one that took me a long time to read because I was reading passages over and over again. So after 20 years of family practice and palliative care experience, Dr. Maté worked for over a decade in Vancouver's downtown East Side with patients challenged by drug addiction and mental illness. The best-selling author of 4 books published in over 30 languages, Gabor is internationally renowned speaker, highly sought after for his expertise on addiction, trauma, childhood development, and the relationship of stress and illness. His book on addiction received the Hubert Evans Prize for Literary Nonfiction. For his groundbreaking medical work and writing, he has been awarded the Order of Canada, his country's highest civilian distinction, and the Civic Merit Award from his hometown in Vancouver. His books bring such a dynamic humanness to this entire experience. He's really asking us, what happened to them to find solution in this? Why is this their their go-to solution? And how are we adding to that stress that is pushing more people to find that a solution in helpful and unhelpful ways? So what I loved about this book is that his approach is not tips and tricks. His approach is not do these things and get this outcome. This book is thought-provoking and it's insightful and it feels very loving and understanding. And it's a deeper, more nuanced read. Like I said, I had to read passages from this book over and over again. So why do I think you should read it? If you're looking for a wider approach and a deeper understanding of how trauma shapes our world and our experiences, this book is a solid read. It is something that just allows us to just feel care. That's what I'll say, care. I think that from an early age, reading this book was really, again, caring and loving, because how often were we taught that even though our body is saying no, we need to say yes? Right? How often was it when we were a child and we were told things like, it's not that big of a deal, or I'll give you something to cry about, or I brought you into this world, I can take you out of this world, like these messages of pushing away our own discomfort. And then we were also kind of told like, well, you should listen to your body. You should stand up for your rights, and how those signals kind of sometimes get crossed. The messages get lost. And instead, really starting to tune into what is the impact of not understanding our own stress responses, and really tuning in and allowing ourselves to just simply be. So I loved this book. I love that on the title, it says a healer to be cherished. And I agree with that. Ways to learn more from Dr. Gabor Maté is his documentary called The Wisdom of Trauma. This was a really powerful documentary. Again, just loving and understanding. So moving on from there, the fifth read, which is at the very deepest, it's the most nuanced, the most clinical, the most scientific, is rated at 5 waves, is Healing. I'm just laughing at 5 waves. Like when I thought like, oh yeah, waves, riding the waves. So this is 5 waves. I'm not laughing at the book. I'm laughing at me rating it 5 waves. The title is Healing Developmental Trauma. And so healing developmental trauma is an expression of a modality, an understanding of ways to care for people who have experienced developmental trauma. So developmental trauma is different than shock trauma. Shock trauma is trauma that is tied around an experience. So a car crash, a death, a move, something that we can attribute it back that created a big shock to our nervous system. And in this approach, healing developmental trauma, it looks at ways that we are left with our needs unmet as children. So although it may seem that humans suffer from an endless number of emotional problems and challenges, the authors, Lawrence Heller and Aline LaPierre, contend that the most of these can be traced back to developmental trauma and to the compromised development of one or more of the 5 core capacities associated with being biologically based core needs that are essential to our physical and emotional well-being. The needs that they break down in this book and the needs that they break down in their practice is the needs for connection, attunement, trust, autonomy, and love and sexuality. And recognizing these needs, as well as the 5 adaptive survival styles set in motion when the core needs are not met early in life. Heller and LaPierre cut through the seemingly complexity of life's problems. So their model is called NARM, and this book breaks down NARM. So NARM is NARM, Neuroaffective Relational Model. It's a model of navigating through this. So what I loved about this book is that this is a deep dive into the NARM method. So like I said, we went from an introduction of childhood trauma, an introduction of trauma, and navigating through. This is a very clinical and more pragmatic book of really breaking down this specific model. So it looks at our adaptations to our own missing needs. Again, like when we've been talking through in this whole series, is that our responses are adaptive in function, and then they can move into being maladaptive when we are not aware of them. And so this framework is used to heal and address traumas. They wrote this book for clinicians, but they also wrote it in a way that it is accessible to people who are wanting to learn more about this model on their own. So why I think you should read it is if you're ready to dig deeper and really go into the nuance connected to developmental trauma, this is a helpful framework and information. Not only does it help break down, like, again, how it serves us in adaptive ways and maladaptive ways, it really helps contextualize how a lot of relationships that we hold, how we can start to see how those developmental needs were also missed in the people around us. So is it a heavier read? Yes. Is it a thicker read? Yes. Does it read like a textbook? Yes. Was this written for clinicians? Yes. Did I find value building upon the foundation that I've already created? Yes. Did I feel like this is, again, a very loving, compassionate modality? Yes. Do I think it would be helpful for others who are ready to do that work to dig deeper into it? Yes. And ways to learn more from these authors is they have a 2-hour presentation, which is just an introduction to NARM. So introduction to the neuroaffective relationship model of healing developmental trauma. So this is kind of breaks it down, and you can hear, again, right from the authors. I hope that this podcast episode, you gained more. Like I said at the beginning, it felt like a little bit like a book report, but I also think that sharing these resources is helpful, and sharing how I look at those resources is helpful. And I hope that you found value in knowing of those 5 resources as well. So in closing, let's consider, how can you, I leave you with one question today, and that question is, how can you begin holding and caring for your experiences? And I ask that so that you can start holding that space for others. The person who met me at SPCA when I was dropping off Jude, they were able to become aware of my experience, and they were able to connect to my experience without adding gasoline to my experience. I undoubtedly, without even asking for confirmation, I know that that person had a background in trauma. They were trauma aware. They understood the signs of it. They knew the observable behaviors. I would hope that that training was to every SPCA worker, so that they could understand, in navigating with the stresses of everything going on, that they know that they're meeting someone in a time of their stress. And so it would make sense that their responses are stress responses, which we've just learned about. And I know that as the person who was in active stress response, the impact it had on me being met with someone who understood and could connect to my experience. Take that lens and bring it back to being a parent. You're meeting your children in their stress responses often, from colors of cups to not tying shoes, to test grades, to friendship conflicts, to all of these spaces. And it's asking us to become aware of our own toolboxes and rise up in our own toolboxes so that we can hold that space for them. And that's why I say this work is done for positive impact, not positive intentions. The person on the other side at SPCA could have wanted to be nice to me and check in and silver line things and tell me, don't worry, it's not that big of a deal. Everything's fine. You're okay here. They could have just had positive intentions and then have a very negative impact on me and my interaction and the trust of me leaving Jude there for care. And instead, they really met me. They felt comfortable meeting me in that space, regulating themselves so that they could help co-regulate me in that moment. And this work it's powerful, because that's what it is. Once you have that toolbox, we use that toolbox wherever we are, because it's our toolbox. If you've been listening today and you've taken notes, I love to know the impact of this work for you and your family. So I encourage you to let me know what it's like. You can do this one of three ways, or any of these three ways. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You can share your thoughts and takeaways on social media and tag me. And you can share your thoughts inside our dedicated posts inside of our Facebook community, Positive Parenting with Megan Ford. Thank you for tuning in and staying to the end. My mission in life is to help support parents in feeling supported and empowered in doing this work. This podcast, my Facebook community, and my programs and book club all help parents work through the phases of awareness, education, and practice. And if you are ready for the next step, I encourage you to dig into the class inside of ClassPass called Emotional Validation. Even if you've already purchased ClassPass, I encourage you to go back and re-listen to this class, especially now since we are on the other opposite end of this little mini series on trauma. You will be visiting this class with fresh eyes, hearing this class in new ways. Inside of this class, it helps you balance your parenting toolbox by helping you connect to your child in a way that helps them feel safe, seen, and heard. If you don't have access to the class, you can get it today at bekindcoaching.com/classpass. And as my free gift to you, you will have access to Raising Respectful Kids. Thank you for being here. I appreciate every single member of this community, and I cannot wait to see you next week. Bye, friends.